Welcome to Side by Side Australasia with Jezza and Dazza. Today we've got Jezza. Wait, can I stop again?
Yeah, stop and start
Something
again.
happened. Okay, so give me a second. I have to go again. Right. Welcome to Side by Side Australasia with Jezza and Dazza. We're following up from our last video where Jezza was talking about his trip from southern China right across to the Kazakhstan border. But today we're going to centre more on his journey within Xinjiang. And Jezza's got some photos for us today to have a look at and talk about those different places within Xinjiang. So Jezza, could you start us off on this first photo you have?
Sure.
Yeah, and tell us where that is.
It's good to be with you again. And I think this is, I got a lot of very, very positive feedback last week and people saying, I'd like to see more about what you're doing in China, away from the news, away from the politics. It's impossible to talk about China without politics. But the idea of this is to kind of touch the politics, but touch the society more. And sort of, I want people to think of China, or Chinese people in particular, as being human. And really, there's a lot of people out there in the world right now who just say, well, it's okay to have a war with China because they're only Chinese. Chinese are people, 1.4 billion of them, and they're wonderful people as well. And I think what I'm trying to do here today, we're going to specialize or focus on just one region of China that has been obviously very, very politicized recently. Now, the first photograph is the only photograph I'm going to show you today, which is not in Xinjiang. This is in a place called Jiayuguan, which is the border of Xinjiang. It's very, very close to the border. And it's an area where a mountain range comes from one side and a mountain range comes from the other side. And then it drops down into a pass. There are two mountain ranges either side. And this is the place where every single Silk Road trader entered China back in the days of the Silk Road, the Jiayuguan mouth, it's known as. And so what we've got here, these two photographs are only about 40 meters apart, but I didn't have a wide angle lens to get them both in the way I wanted them. And what I'm showing here is you've got two very distinct and different religions in one compound. There's one wall, and behind that wall is a mosque. And the one on the right, with the spires coming out of the pagoda-style building, is Tibetan style. And what this means is that people coming into this area would probably have built the original mosque. These are all quite modern, obviously. And you can tell that from the appearance of them. They're clean and they're modern. But they have been built in the style of which the people would have come through. And probably once you get into past the Jiayuguan mouth, you are inside of what used to be the larger part of China, because you had to come across a desert through the mountain range, and this is the spot you would have ended up. Depending on which route you would have came, you would have still ended up in this spot. If you've taken the northern route, the southern route, whichever way you came into China, this is it. And that's why this is important. It's not actually in Xinjiang, but it's a couple of 100 kilometers short of the Xinjiang border in a place called Jiayuguan. And there's another interesting factor about Jiayuguan. It's really an interesting city that I think anybody who comes to China, most people have never heard of it. But if you're coming on a travel to China and you really want to explore China, Jiayuguan is a place you shouldn't miss. It is on the end of the Great Wall. There is a fort at Jiayuguan too. I'm not showing that today because my idea today was to focus on Xinjiang, but I just wanted to show this. But Jiayuguan has that complete history of China in a microcosm of one city. Now, the fort is actually very modern and new, built in an old style. They've built a replica of the fort in the same way that they've recreated parts of the Great Wall. But what you can find when you're in this area, if you're just driving along the road, you look at the side of the road and there's a wall, and that is 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Some of it is only 600 or 700 years old, and you can tell where it is. Some of it is Qing dynasty, some of it is Ming dynasty, and some of it is even older. So you've got all these little microcosms of history taking place in one city. So Jiayuguan itself is quite a modern city. It's a nice little city. There's a few cities out there but they're usually 200 or 300 kilometers apart. You go from Jiaiguan to Yumen, from Yumen into the border of Xinjiang. And this area here has also got the Dongguan grottos, where the Buddhists lived inside of not far from here. It's not actually in Jiaiguan. It's a couple of 100 kilometers away. But when you're in this area, a couple of 100 kilometers is a relative thing. It's a big, wide open area, as you can see from the beautiful blue skies. It's also a desert area. So that was why I wanted to show that particular picture. And now I want to move on a little bit and show you some of the style of the region. What we've got there is a restaurant. And anybody who reads Chinese will recognize it's a noodle restaurant, and noodles are really famous out there. The bottom character on each of the strings of letters, or strings of characters, is noodles, man. And so you can go there and you can have your noodles. And really interesting what Phil is my co-writer, what he's doing there, washing his hands. We're always changing tires and stuff like that. Yeah. And every single restaurant, this is a restaurant, it's an old prefabricated structure which has been turned into a restaurant. The floor is bare concrete, the everything is steel and wood. There's nothing comfortable about it. But you see Phil standing right next to a hot urn, and that's for hand washing. It's not for drinking, it's for hand washing. They have soap and they have water, and they let you in fact they encourage you wash your hands before you go in. I guess that's probably it's an Islamic thing that you wash your hands a lot more. A lot of people don't like Islam. They say, oh, it's dirty, it's dusty. Well, the fact is, it's predominantly a desert religion, and washing is really important for these people. They are dusty, they are dirty. They wash every time they pray. They wash before they eat. And throughout the rest of the world, I haven't seen this, where you walk into a restaurant, before you walk in, everybody washes their hands. And that's what Phil's doing there.
Yeah,
trying to get some of the grit of the road off.
Yeah. My sister-in-law's ex-husband was Lebanese and Muslim faith, and he told me that water is like a sacred thing in Islam. You'll see it in a lot of, if you go to the mosques, a lot of them have fountains. Water is a big thing in the culture, and washing is a huge part of the culture. Huge part. Yeah, it's a huge part of pretty much everything that they do. So I mean that was really one of the points I wanted to make there. Let's have a look. The idea of this picture, again, that's Phil, it's me taking the picture. I'm trying to show the diversity of Xinjiang. Right. There are a lot of people who say Xinjiang is a closed area. You can't go there. You need tour guides. That's Phil. I'm taking the photo. There's no one else. There's no one else for miles and miles and miles. Now, there's obviously a track leading to somewhere. Now, what's up that track? Is it a camp? Is it a workstation? Is it a gas field? I don't know. We never found out. The fact is, we pitched our tents very close to this, and we're able to just wander around freely, take photographs. There's no one anywhere has ever, in the I guess probably about 6 weeks of my cycling in Xinjiang. The first trip was more than 3 weeks. The second trip was less than 3 weeks. So probably about 6 weeks of being in Xinjiang on a bike and taking literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of photos. No one's ever asked to see one officially. I show them all the time, but no police officer has ever said, let's see what you've got on your camera. And they don't know where we are. This is the beauty of it. We go in there with our camping gear and our tents. They register us into the region. We have to go in through the check. There's checks everywhere. But once we're in that region, we go wherever we want to go. And no one's ever stopped us or told us you can't go somewhere. So that was the point of this. In the background there, you've got the Tian Shan Mountains. They're snow covered for 12 months of the year. They're permanently snow covered. And right now I'm seeing Twitter things and Douyin and things like that, where the kids in Xinjiang are taking their PE lessons on the snowfields now. They're skiing and snowboarding. Yeah, kids from school are going snowboarding.
Winter sports is huge up there, and this is supposedly an oppressed state or oppressed region. I see no evidence of it. There's certainly no evidence when I'm traveling around there. And this kind of, I don't know if this proves it or supports it. We just wandered wherever the hell we wanted to wander. Now, for us, because we were on a journey, we were pretty much on the main roads. But there's plenty of side roads we could have taken and nobody would have stopped us. When we go into a town at night or in the evening, if we want to stop in a town, then you register with the police. But we did that in every single hotel in China registers you with the police. That's just part of being in China.
Is that just to keep an eye on, visas and people not overstaying? And it's more.
No, it's not. It's not even about that. It's not about us foreigners. There are hotels that won't take foreigners, full stop, because it's inconvenient. They've got more paperwork to do. They don't know how to do it. They're not connected. So a lot of hotels are connected to the police reporting system, but foreigners become an issue. Our passport number doesn't fit into the correct box of the ID number. So they actually need hotels. By law, every hotel in China can take a foreigner. In practice, many of them don't. And so if you are visiting China and you want to go to a hotel, then the chances are it's a good idea to get a Chinese person to travel with. That's one thing. If you're traveling independently, I actually wrote an article about this a few months ago, and no one published it. I sent it to 3 or 4 different Chinese media outlets, and they said, no, I'm not interested in that, because it was negative. It said, if you're coming to China as an independent traveler, don't. At least not yet. That was the title of my article. And really, I would discourage anyone being independent traveling in China. You need to have a Chinese person. Sorry?
Safety or?
No, China's incredibly safe. China's incredibly safe. It's not about safety. It's about administration and bureaucracy. China is extremely bureaucratic. You don't hear me say many negative things, but this is one of them. China is bureaucratic.
You have to control, but regulate. Like any country, you have to regulate. What's happening with the population. No law breaches.
Some people would say it's authoritarian. The Chinese people don't really care. When I say I can go to a hotel in the UK without my passport, they say, well, how do you register? You don't. But how do the police know where you are? They don't.
Yeah.
Wow. And for some people, that's a little bit of a surprise. It's just a different culture, different way of looking at things. Chinese people are not bothered by something that Western people are bothered by. How can you travel from city to city without your passport? Well, in Europe, you can travel from country to country without it. So, it's a really different world out there. It's bureaucratic, and you get into a hotel, and you may even be in a hotel. You've registered, you've paid. You're in your room, you've done your washing or whatever it is that you start off by doing. When we're on bikes, we're often doing laundry before we'll have a cup of coffee and do our laundry and then go out and get something to eat. So you might have the laundry done, and then you get a knock on the door and it's someone saying, I'm sorry, you can't stay here. The administrative department have said you can't have foreigners there. So usually they're pretty good when they do this. I mean, obviously it's infuriating, and I've blown up about it a couple of times. But I do blow up occasionally. But what happens is usually they come and say, we've got you another hotel down the road for the same price. And all you have to do is pack everything up. Your wet stuff goes in. They'll provide bin bags for you to put your wet stuff in. They take you down the road. They help you to check in. Now, for us, who we speak a little Chinese, we can get through this and do it. But if you're an independent traveler who speaks no Chinese, you are screwed in China, really. So I would suggest, I travel with my wife. She books the hotels in advance. She'll phone them up and say, are foreigners allowed? And they either say yes or no. If they say yes, we'll book it. If they say no, we'll just try the next one. Sometimes if we're going into a town, if it's just me, I'll ask them, where can a foreigner stay in this town? And we'll set it up on the phone, and they'll put the name of the hotel into my phone for me, and then GPS it. So I know I've got 180 meters or 1.7 kilometers to go to a hotel that does accept foreigners. So you can get through it. But if you are an independent traveler who has never been to China before, it's going to be difficult. And I would suggest don't do that. unless, I mean, even modern days with translators, it's difficult. You don't understand what's going on. And things can change. Something you've already established is okay, suddenly becomes not okay. So that's China for you. We have an expression, those of us in the foreign community, just kind of, we have this expression we call TIC. This is China. Just let it go, work through it.
Every country has its hurdles.
I would suggest that the hurdles for an independent traveler in China are probably greater than the hurdles for an independent traveler in most other countries. And more so if you don't speak the language. Sorry?
Yeah, that was my question. It was more, you just answered that question, was the language barrier.
If you can speak Chinese, then you'd probably be okay. People are very helpful. They really want to help most of the time. And you don't get obnoxious people saying, no, we can't take you because you're foreigners. We're really sorry. We're not allowed to take foreigners. And, my boss won't let me. I've made 2 phone calls. Some of them will make phone calls to the boss, to the government office. They'll try. But at the end of the day, they say, I'm sorry, we can't. I'm just not allowed to. And because of the nature of Chinese people, they won't generally disobey the rules. Now, having said that, I've stayed in hotels, and I'm not going to say where they are, just in case. I've stayed in hotels that don't even want to see my passport. I go in there with my wife, and they just say, okay, 60 RMB a night, 80 RMB, 100 RMB, whatever the price is. And do you want a passport? No, don't worry about that. They'll take Anne's passport, my wife, but they won't take mine off me. Because it's more trouble than it's worth. And so, you do get people who break the rules. And it depends where you are. The worst place for traveling for me has been Guangdong, where I live. If I go to another city in Guangdong, I'm always struggling to find a hotel. When I go to Xinjiang, it's easier because they just say, go to that hotel. And they can. There's no problem. And it's much easier in Xinjiang. But here we are out in, this is a desert camping spot. And that's what we were doing out there. We were camping, and the Tian Shan Mountains, the Heavenly Mountains, are in the distance. Got a great name. Tian Shan literally means heaven mountain. So the Tian Shan Mountains are there. Phil went off on a walk. He's a professional photographer. He went off on a walk and didn't come back till after dark. I was a little worried about him, whether he would find me or not. And here's an interesting thing. He called me up and says, hey, Jerry, can you shine your torch? I don't know where the campsite is. So I'm out there shining my torch in the sky. And then he's shining his torch somewhere else. I can see you. Come this way. What way? I don't know. Turn east, turn west, whatever it was we're doing. We don't know where east and west is. I had a compass on my bike. He had a compass on his bike, but we didn't have one in our pocket. But it was a little worrying that night when he couldn't see or hear me. So he phoned me. Now, there's another little trick about China that people don't know. Look where we are. There is no city, there's no town within 100 kilometers of that. And he phoned me. He phoned me and said, where are you? I don't know where you are. Yeah, amazing. That's something. Go on.
The connections are good.
Yeah. This is the following day. So where we are, there is 262 kilometers from Urumqi and 924 from the border, effectively. So what I'm trying to portray there is, if you looked the picture before and you had the beautiful mountains, now you look at this one, and we're only 30, 40 kilometers away. You can see how desolate it is. You and I talked about how the desert preserves the mummies and things like that. But it also it turns you into a prune, first of all. It completely, is it desiccate? Is that the right word? Desiccates you. It takes all the moisture out of you.
Just like Darwin, Central Australia.
I would say, I'm not so sure about Darwin, but Central Australia certainly. I went a few years ago to a place called Port Augusta in South Australia. And that and this area are very, very similar. There's no trees. There are some mountains in the distance. I think Mount There's a crater, a huge crater. I can't remember what it's called, and it created mountains because it hit the earth, impacted, and created these mountainous things near Port Augusta in southern Australia. And I would say the weather there and the weather here in Xinjiang, I would say they're probably pretty similar.
Well, thanks for that. Sorry, I had been to Port Augusta,
right.
And I remember getting out of Port Augusta, and the electrical poles in Port Augusta are concrete.
Yeah.
Because I think the heat buckling, and also I think because of termites. So that's a good indication. Thanks for that, because I did go to Port Augusta, so I know what you're talking about in that way. Okay. So that's
we were there. Where we are here in this picture, the following day it snowed.
Really?
We left Hami, the city of Hami. It might have been the day before or the following. I'm not exactly sure geographically. No, it'll be a few days before. 262 kilometers is 300 kilometers beyond Hami. So 2 days before, we were in a region like that, and it snowed. And now,
really,
yeah. So you can see the difference, and it happens quite quickly. And apparently, it doesn't rain very often in Hami, but when it does rain, they say, "Oh, it doesn't rain hard." We left Hami at breakfast time, and it was drizzling. And I remember saying to the lady, "Oh, we didn't really expect rain here." She said, "Oh, don't worry, it never rains very hard." And we got on our bike, and as we went probably less than 10 kilometers, the rain started sheeting it down. And then it turned into sleet. Then it turned into hailstones, and we were being hammered, hit with, and you're riding along on a bike, and the hailstones are hitting you, and they're marble-sized hailstones. They're not quite eggs or tennis balls like I've seen in Australia, but they're decent-sized marbles, and they're hitting you pretty hard as you're riding along. So we stopped. We found a bridge, and we stopped under a bridge for a little while, and we waited for about 20, 30 minutes. The hailstones passed, and then it started snowing. So it was like, what the hell is going on? Yeah, so it was freezing cold. I'm not sure. I can't remember if I put a picture of the snow. I've got pictures of the snow. Maybe for the next time, I'll get a picture of the snow, and I'll prove it to you. And you'll see the scenery was very similar to the scenery that we just saw, except that there's ice on the road. Moving on to the next one.
Yes.
This is an area that you were talking about a little while ago before we came online. You were talking about the Tarim Basin. This is Turpan, Turfan. And what we've got here are two very distinctly different things, but they're both Islamic related. The Emin minaret on the left, the picture on the left, this tall phallic looking symbol there, that is the tallest adobe minaret in Asia. I believe in Africa there's a couple that are taller, but this is the tallest in Asia. It's a mud-built minaret, and it is a genuine. It's very old, yes, several hundred years old. It's a genuine tourist attraction, and it's open for tourists. It gets like 1 million tourists a year. We didn't actually go in it. That's why my picture is at the distance. We didn't go in it for two reasons. One is we didn't find it until quite late in the day, and it was only 20 minutes before closing, and we had to pay, I think it was 60 RMB. And I just felt that 60 RMB, I've got a photograph of it. Let's leave it at that. I wish we were tired. We've been riding. It was a day off, actually. And we had a rest day. And in fact, we ended up 3 days in Turpan because Phil got sick. He ate something that didn't agree with him, and we spent an extra day. And we were going to leave, and then a dust storm came through. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is Turpan in 2014. After the troubles, after the security clampdowns, as they call them, after the Uyghur uprisings, if that's what you want to call them, this is Turpan. And there you have on the right-hand side a very, very beautiful local mosque, just sitting in a side street. And the doors are closed. I
Right.
haven't got a photograph of it, but the doors were open when we walked past. It never occurred to me, because I was just cycling there, it never occurred to me to take photographs of the political side of things at this time. This is 2014. I didn't come onto Twitter and show pictures like this until 2020. And then people started to say to me, "Oh, look, the thing is closed because you're not allowed to worship there."
Right.
How many times have I don't know if you're a religious guy. I know I'm not, but I used to go to church when I was a kid. Yeah, I went to church on Sunday. If I'd gone there on Saturday, the church would have been closed.
Exactly.
If I'd gone on Monday or Tuesday after the 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. mass, the church would have been closed.
Same in Australia.
Churches are closed when they're not open. Simple. And so I'm sure that if people want to go in there, they can go in there. But later on in the day, when we walked past again, it was open. There were people coming in and out. And every time I show this picture to anyone, they say, "Oh, that proves it. See, the doors are closed." Like, if you really wanted to destroy Islam, there wouldn't be any doors on there. Come on, let's be realistic about it.
People say things to suit their narrative, Jezza.
Yeah.
And look, I go, I'm a Catholic background when I was younger. If I go, if I go today, Saturday, the church is not open. There's no one there. The priest might be in the registry.
It'll open at 5 o'clock for confessions or something like that, I think, if it's a Catholic church.
Yeah,
and then tomorrow morning it'll be open for 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock mass. I bet you they don't even do all those masses anymore. Not enough people go there.
That's right.
It just doesn't justify it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a normal thing. You walk past a mosque at a certain time of the day, it's closed. You walk past a mosque at another time of the day, and it's open. So this myth of religious, I've just shown you a picture of a Tibetan temple and a mosque in the same building. Here's a mosque that is a modern day regularly used mosque, and here's a historical mosque that hasn't been pulled down or destroyed. It's turned into it's a working mosque as well, but it's been turned into a tourist, because it is such a valuable historical artifact. I think it's been turned into a tourist destination. 100 million tourists have visited this a year over the last few years.
In Melbourne, the city, St. Peter's Cathedral or St. Paul's Cathedral on Flinders Street is actually a huge tourist attraction.
Right, yeah.
If you go into Melbourne, the church doors are open on that church because they're historic church.
Well, the tourist attractions are. I grew up I went to school in a cathedral city, and the cathedral was open all the time, but you had to pay to go in it. No, you didn't have to pay. You had to give a donation. So it's free if you wanted to, but you're encouraged to donate. Well, in this case, they don't say that. They just say you're going to charge it. I mean, the upkeep of something like this, the largest adobe minaret in Asia, the upkeep must be enormous. I don't mind paying for it. I just didn't pay for it. 1, because it was late in the day. 2, because I was tired. We'd walked for several hours through the back streets of Turpan, and a bunch of kids told us where it was. We're looking for the minaret, and I couldn't speak their language, and they couldn't speak mine. And they showed us where it was, and we were, look, it cost 60 RMB to go in, and it's already 5:20, and it closes at 6. So let's not bother. So we didn't bother, and so we walked back. And in walking back, I saw this mosque operating and working quite normally. So let's move on a little bit. So we're this is the streets that we're walking through. This is the back streets of Turpan. Not all the roads are this good, the lanes and the alleyways, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about here. It's dead quiet. It's dead quiet. And again, the problem is that people will say, "Oh, see, there's no one in the streets. They're all afraid." No, they're either working or they're asleep.
What about the hot weather? In the afternoon, would people want to be inside because of the hot weather?
This is the thing. You see the way these bricks are laid in the top of the house? That's an airing and a drying area. They dry their grapes inside of their houses. Do you see what the things are outside the house? That's their beds. That's where they sleep at night when it's really, really hot. So, you've got some quite interesting human factors here. This was just us walking through. It was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's after the afternoon sleep. It's before the evening meal, and people are just going about their normal work. We saw lots of people, but this picture.
So having a
Sorry?
siesta. They'll be having their siesta because
No. If they were having their siesta, they'd be on those beds that you can see.
So,
So they've gone back to work.
Is it cool inside the houses at this time?
They see where the house has been built with the shade. It's cooler outside than inside.
Right.
But the inside is used for drying. That's what these bricks are for. The breeze goes through them and it dries. And it's an amazing thing. In Xinjiang, they do have a wine industry, and it's very, very well developed. It's not bad wine either. And the Uyghurs, who are Muslims, make wine. But they also are very famous for their dates and their raisins and sultanas. And there's another one, little red one, that goes into all the soups. These are all these grapes are grown in this area. And I guess if your sultanas don't come from California, they probably come from Xinjiang.
Right.
That's how big this business is, this industry. It's a massive industry where they're drying fruit. And that's what their building is. That's exactly what they're doing inside of that building. And it's designed so the brickwork is leaving all these gaps and holes so the breeze can go through and dry everything. It's as dry as a bone up there. Or as the Australians would say, it's as dry as a dead dingo's donger up there. All the irrigation is underground. The water is underground, because if it wasn't, it would just evaporate away. It's so hot, so dry. There's no humidity at all. Humidity is probably 1% or something. And that's what you get to see. Now, again, I've got this thing in my head where people are going to challenge me and say, look, there's no one there. So that proves. And in fact, in my opinion, the fact there's no one there proves there's no oppression, because they're all busy working. They're doing what they need to do. But when we go around that area, we actually see lots of people. I just in fact, I probably waited until everyone was gone to take that photo. That's the difference with me. I wasn't thinking of the political side of it, and now people point out to me, there's a political side to this, and you've missed it. Well, I have.
Take one snapshot of any city and show an industry. So. Just going off one photo is not. Well, there is actually in the middle. I don't know if you can see in the middle of the picture. There is actually a kid on a bike, maybe skipping off school or something. I don't know, but I don't know if you can even see that. There's a car park there just behind the car. There's a kid on a bike, so maybe it needs to be blown up to have a look at it. But that's the only person in there. So let's move on from there. Now, what I said, we stayed an extra night in Turpan because we had dust storm. And this is a guy sweeping up outside of our hotel. We came out and there's like an inch layer of dust. It's like it snowed, but it snowed dust. And you see, this is my bike seat. And I was having a little joke. I wrote "clean me" on the side. I think it's like from the drink me from Alice in Wonderland. The reason I wrote that and took the picture is because the bike was actually inside the hotel. It was inside the reception of the hotel. And that's how insidious this dust is. This dust is not like big sandy dust. It's powder dust. It's talcum powder. And they close all the windows. They told us you can't leave tomorrow morning because there's going to be a dust storm and you won't be able to leave. And we said, okay, it didn't bother us. We were in a nice little hostel. And so we just, okay, we'll stay an extra night. And so we did. And this is how much dust got into our hotel room, into our hotel reception area. My hotel room was nice because it was built underground. We talked about this last week. The hotel had no air conditioning. Sorry, it did have air conditioning, but I didn't need it. It was quite hot outside. You go inside and the reception area of the hotel was nice, but then you go into a lower area, down 2 or 3 steps, and through an arched doorway. An arch. My room was just an arch cut out of the hill that it was on, and they built this hostel around it. So effectively, I was sleeping under, I don't know, 100 feet of mountain inside. But I was only downstairs 3 or 4 steps, but it was built on backing onto a hill. So it was a really nice place. I don't know if that place is still open. This is 2014, so I'd have to find out if it's still open or not. So that's what a dust storm looks like in Xinjiang, and this is what snow looks like in Xinjiang. This is not
this is not the same place. As I said, we had snow. This is a totally different place. Where we are here is probably 600 kilometers west of Urumqi. This is very near the border of Kazakhstan in a city called Korgash. Not in, it's outside of the city, but this is in the mountains. And you'll see, if you follow anything about Xinjiang, you'll find that there's mountains there, there's desert there, there's grasslands there. It's incredibly diverse country. Xinjiang is bigger than Germany, and I think bigger than Germany and France together. It's a big country. So you can expect to get diversity. Now, you'll notice here, we're not carrying any panniers on our racks, on our bikes, because I've had to tell this story a few times when people look at this picture and they say, well, this doesn't look like before when we had the yellow bags on our bikes. And it doesn't. Our wives, his wife, my wife, our mothers-in-law, and a good friend of ours flew to Urumqi to meet with us. And this friend of ours, who is the head of the Zhongshan Photographers Association, organized the Xinjiang Photographers Association to meet us. And we had 2 support cars that drove with us across the mountains and stuff. So we actually, for part of the ride after Urumqi, we rode from the border of Macau all the way to Urumqi. Then we stopped there for a day. Our wives joined us. And then from there to the border of Kazakhstan, we had cars, we had support vehicles. And sometimes we would put our bikes onto the roof of the vehicle and go over the mountain and stuff like that. On this occasion, we got the bikes off for a ride because we were planning to ride down the mountain. We ended up riding about 3 kilometers and then saying, nah, this is too dangerous. The roads are sheets of ice. Our tires had all done nearly 5,000 kilometers, so they were pretty bare tires. We should have changed tires. If we're going to ride in through the mountains, we should have had better tires, and we didn't. So we basically just said, no, let's forget it. We put the bikes back on, and we only rode a few kilometers to get this picture. We got a few pictures of us riding through snow, but we weren't really geared up for snow. So we put the bikes back on the trucks, went down the mountain, and then went for another ride after that because it was a lot safer.
I bet.
But it shows the diversity of China, I think. And here's another one that shows the diversity of China. Again, this is another of these things that I put this picture in. This is at the bottom of that mountain on the other side, so 600-700 kilometers from Urumqi. This lady is not Uyghur; she's Kazakh, and Kazakh. Yeah, we could have her on the show, the Dazza, Jezza, and Kazakh show. She's a Kazakh, and that area there's a lot of Kazakhs, and there's a lot of other people there living there. And she's wearing a scarf, and people keep telling me they can't wear scarves. What do you mean they can't wear scarves? Of course they can wear scarves. Everybody wears a scarf up there, and this is just normal. Almost every female you see is wearing a scarf, and it's part of their dress. What they can't wear is the hijab. They can't wear the burqa or the hijab. They can't cover their face in Xinjiang. And the same thing applies to the men. They can't grow a full face beard until they're over 55 years of age. Then they're allowed to. So the elders are allowed to, the youngers are not. And the reason is very, very simple: facial recognition. Now, you could say, oh, that's oppressive, that's authoritarian. It's just a fact. They have had very serious terrorism, and now they want to identify people, and it's just the way it is. It's not oppressive at all. These people just wander around freely doing whatever they want to do. They don't notice any oppression, and as long as you're not doing anything wrong, then there's no oppression for you. Now, the human rights activists and the civil libertarians will jump down my throat with that comment and say, there you go, you see, as soon as you say that, you're capitulating to them. Yeah, maybe. But if you're not doing anything wrong, what harm is there?
I just want to say something. We're talking about Kazakhstan and Kazakh. I sent you a photo in the chat of a 1375 map, Catalan map, of the area takes in Xinjiang to the Caspian Sea in Kazakhstan.
Right, interesting. Okay.
In this picture in the Caspian Sea in Kazakhstan is a Chinese junk in the
Yeah.
picture in the ancient map, and even it's called, and you probably, I don't know if you remember this name, but the Amu, Darya, is Daya River that leads sort of near or into the Caspian Sea, going towards the east, toward China. And just when I see that picture of that lady and I think of Kazakhstan and the cultural mix, the trade going back to the 14th century, 1300s, seeing this picture from that Catalan map of a Chinese junk in the Caspian Sea would have been, the amazing mix of cultures at that time.
I very much doubt that it went from China across Kazakhstan because there's just too many mountains to cross. It could have ended up going through the Black Sea into the Black Sea. I don't know my geography too much about that area, but I'm fairly sure it would have traveled by ocean to get there.
Unless it was built at the Chinese administration out there locally.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible it was built by Chinese builders. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little known fact about this region. This is China. Okay, she's Chinese, but she's a Kazakh. She's ethnically Kazakh. Kazakh is one of the 56 ethnic minorities in China, or ethnicities in China. So is Tajik. And there's a country called Tajikistan. So is Kyrgyzstan. So is Kazakhstan. Now, there's not, as far as I'm aware, there's no Pakistanis inside, but stan just means country. That's and right. When you take a look around, China is surrounded by the stans. Afghanistan is the country of the Afghans. Kazakhstan is the country of the Kyrgyz. Tajikistan. These are all, some of them I can't even say properly, but these are all countries of the people. Stan just means country. So this is why the Turkics claim that this is their region, because Turkestan is what they want to call it. And that's what they've done. Effectively, what happened when the Russians were developing the Soviet Union, they drew some new maps and they gave the Turkics, their own country. And that's the only reason East Turkestan even exists. It's not because it was ever a country that China took over. It was drawn on a map because it gave the people a name. Kazakhstan for the Kazakhs, Tajikistan for the Tajiks, Afghanistan, and so on. Just keep going. So this is the reason.
Going on my research on this topic, and this is just my study research, that when you go to my study on the Uyghur people, going back to the Sui dynasty, I think it was 500 AD or 500 AD from my memory, China had administration of the area out in the west. And there was an invasion by the Go-Turks where they pushed the Uyghurs out of Mongolia. They Islamanized them first. They converted to Islam, pushed them out. And that's from my history study. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they pushed them out of Mongolia into that area. And that was like an invasion. I think it was about during the Byzantine, the Byzantine Empire, the Turkish
post-Roman. I'm not going to try and correct you. I'm sure there are many people with more knowledge than I have, but my understanding is that the Turkestans, the Turks, came there about 600 AD. That's my understanding. And they came with the religion that they had, which was Islam, but they weren't the predominant people for the region. If we go a little further into China, we've got the Hui Muslims who are Chinese, and my understanding of that is that most of them would be converts from the Silk Road travelers.
My question then is this. I know that when you look at Tarim Basin mummy, there's Scythian Celts. They've got the Tartan. The DNA matches up too, because the DNA matches there from Baltic Celts, and they've got some East Asian Chinese within the Tarim Basin mummies. And they've got tattooed faces like the Celts had, which the Scythian Celts had. Are there minorities there that are throwbacks, that are not Islamic throwbacks to maybe those people?
absolutely. There's a town in Gansu where they say the Roman Empire ended, and there are people there with blue eyes, people there with red hair. There's people like that. Now, DNA doesn't help very much because
No, not
the
all of it.
DNA is all up in that area anyway. And I know that there was supposedly a lost legion of Romans, so that puts it after your period. But I don't know about before. I really don't know. But there are definitely, and when you travel through Gansu and into Xinjiang, you will meet people who have blue eyes or much lighter brown eyes.
Yeah.
They definitely could pass for Europeans. If you asked them, if you saw them, you might say, "Where'd you come from?" If they say, "I'm Chinese," you'd be, "Oh, really? That's a surprise. They don't look Chinese to me." And that's a fact. There are people who don't look Chinese living in Gansu and in Xinjiang. Where they came from, when they came there, that's a matter for debate, historians, DNA science to sort out.
But
Let's look.
Let's
move on.
My
I'll
history.
show you another. Hang on.
Irish side, just forgotten. My Celtic history from the Irish side of Aod, and I've done this history, goes back to a guy named Gael de Glass, who was a Scythian from the region. So the world in the ancient times was more connected, I think, than we give it credit for. And
it definitely is more connected. If you read books by people like Peter Frankopan, who wrote the New Silk Roads, you'll learn a lot more about this. I mean, I've read the book, but I'm no expert on the region. I wanted to show this picture for a very good reason. I want you to have a look at this and say, the girl in the orange, the pink jacket, where does she come from?
There seems to be Western features there.
Yeah.
And that's a question I could not answer because I don't know her personally or her family. But
okay, do you think she's related to this family? She could be, couldn't she?
Yeah, she could be, because there can be variances in the genes when they're born of what comes out in the child.
She's actually born in Ireland. She's Irish.
Really?
Yeah,
well,
she's the daughter. She's the daughter of my co-writer, and she came across, and his wife and daughter and mother-in-law all came, and this is what she looks like. And this is a Kazakh home. This is a home where people live. This is, we weren't tourists in this area. We were guests, and we were taken in, and we got food. This particular day, I wasn't actually there. This is not my photograph. We were having a rest day in a place called Wenchuan, which is a really beautiful little town, very near the Kazakh border. And my wife and the others went off for a jaunt, and I just said, no, I want to have a rest. I want to just stay in bed for a while. And I just relaxed. Found myself a place where I could have a beer and take a few photographs of the town, which is beautiful. And they went off, and this is a photograph. This is where they had their lunch, sitting on what I would call a prayer mat. Look at the wallpaper is mats, and these are all local Kazakh customs. So you're well into what appears to be a very, very different culture. Now, when people say, "Oh, they're oppressing the Uyghurs," hang on. Why would they just oppress the Uyghurs? These people are Kazakhs. They're a different culture. They are Muslims. They live like this, and it's different to Chinese people living in the other parts of China. Why would they just oppress the Muslims and not these people? You never hear about these people being oppressed. So they live in China, and they're living a very normal life. And she's got a scarf on as well. Just to show it. But I've got a lot of pictures like this of just day-to-day living in what appears to be Kazakh style, Kazakh culture, Kazakh ethnicity inside of China. The Chinese people. That's except the Irish girl in there. She's Irish. Yeah, that's how it is. Now, I think we're coming towards the end of our chat. We're 48 minutes. We'll get this under an hour today.
I was just going to say, when you talk about Kazakhstan, I don't think Sacha Baron Cohen as the character of Borat really told us too much about Kazakhstan or the culture. I think you've given it more justice than him.
I think Kazakhstan as a country has every right to be upset with Borat.
Yeah,
and Sacha Baron Cohen, he does. I admit he's funny, but it's not nice if you're a Kazakh, obviously.
You know what?
Go on.
When I was in a hotel, I think it was in Beijing, and I was in Hong Kong. Sorry, in Hong Kong, and I was talking from someone from Kazakhstan. He was a business person, and we got on the topic. And he said, yeah, he didn't really give our country much justice and the culture. And that's just like what people say in, sledging China. And I said, well, every culture is different. But I said, but us in the West, we just dismiss him as a comedian. We don't take him seriously. And we don't judge the country through his eyes. So I had an interesting conversation going on that. So,
there's a big issue about it. In my mind, there is a big issue.
Yes.
What he does insults an ethnic culture, a national identity. And whilst we laugh at it and say it's funny, it's not funny if it's offending people.
Exactly.
And we need to be cognizant of that fact.
Exactly.
I grew up listening to Irish jokes, for example. Now, Irish people, I know loads of Irish people, and most of them don't take offense, but some do. And if they do take offense, then there's an offense there. And I think we need to recognize when someone has taken offense, it's because it's offensive to them. It may not appear to be to us.
I laugh at more the stupidity of it, that it doesn't represent their culture. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't take them seriously at all. But the problem is there's people in society that will and will use it to denigrate other people from those countries, which is a dangerous thing. And that's the same with this anti-China stuff. I have seen a lot of racist caricatures of Chinese people from the people.
These are the people who say, I don't hate Chinese people. I just hate their government. And what they don't realize is Chinese people are their government, and their government are Chinese people. There's not a separation between the government and China and the government and Chinese people. They are one and the same. You can't. I made this comment once before. Once you mix water and wine, you can't separate them. Once you mix the Communist Party with the people of China, they're inseparable. You just can't separate them. They're just too deeply ingrained in society. And here's the thing. Westerners may look at that and say, it's insidious. They've got into society. No, Chinese people welcome them because every single year is better than last year. Everything they're doing is better than they used to be done. All the things that people in the West dislike about the Chinese government, Chinese people like.
And people don't realize that the Chinese government embraced their civilization history. They actually get guided by it in some ways. So people don't realize.
But then you're going to get people who say, but what about the Cultural Revolution? And I always say, well, how old were you when it ended? I wasn't born until 1982. Okay, so you weren't around during the Cultural Revolution. So you're talking about something that is effectively pre your own life. Yes, there were problems. Yes, there were things in history. Yes, there were changes. And yes, it was horrible. But it's not today. It's not. I saw a book, didn't read it. I saw a book the other day written by a China expert who served in the British Embassy in 1976 at the end of the Cultural Revolution. He served in the British Embassy a lifetime ago. He's now in his 80s and he's written a book that people say, oh, it's a book written by an expert. No, it's not. It's a book written by a guy who's got no experience whatsoever of modern China. Or what the party is doing here.
Now, people don't realise that Cultural Revolution time, it was a time of them shaking off the oppression of colonialism. And they were trying to find the best way of the West not getting inside and disrupting their society. So there was a lot of debates and very.
There's another very interesting aspect to the Cultural Revolution that most people don't realise. And the reason they don't realise is this. Educated people suffered during the Cultural Revolution. I don't think anyone will argue that. Education was considered to be bourgeoisie, and it was not a good thing to have glasses. We'd both be, we'd have to both. We can't see where you are, mate, but that's what it would have been if we'd been born. I was born at that time, and I lived through that time. I was 18 when the Cultural Revolution finished. Now, all of those academics who struggled through, not all, some of those academics who struggled through left China afterwards, and they wrote books about it. And that's what we know about the Cultural Revolution. My father-in-law, who only went to school for 3.5 years, joined the military, became a squadron leader. He's not an officer. He got back into society after his military service, normal society or public society, after his military service, and he did quite well working inside of, everybody worked for the government at different departments, was all government controlled. He did very well. He was off senior positions in government roles. He didn't take them. He was happy doing what he was doing. And he actually, and his wife, my mother-in-law, benefited greatly from the Cultural Revolution. They were peasant farmers. Had they not had a Cultural Revolution, my mother-in-law would never have spent 35 or 40 years as a teacher, which is what she did. And my father-in-law would never have got into the army and would never have worked for the government and he would have been a peasant farmer had there been no Cultural Revolution. Now, these are not exceptions.
Yeah, there's 100 years of humiliation of China. That was before, with the Japanese invasion and all that, prior to the Cultural Revolution. So there was obviously there's going to be a lot of mistrust at that time that they don't want to go back to that. They were in fear of going back to that awful 100-year of humiliation. So,
which is exactly why they're so, I wouldn't say China is assertive. I would say that China is defensive right now. Yeah. Very defensive to the point of being offensive about it. And I have no qualms in saying that China is very, very defensive and possibly a little over the top, but it's just defensive. China's not threatening Taiwan. China's not threatening the Philippines. Yeah. China's not threatening Vietnam. China's not threatening America, except for its financial and economic. China is not doing the things that America says it's doing. It's just defending its own interests to avoid another 100 years like that.
Exactly. What Paul Keating said in his interview the other day on the National Press Club, was that even Kissinger, when he went to China, admitted China are only defending their border areas and extending a bit out of it to give themselves a buffer, because we have to remember that the US, their military bases are surrounding China. I mean, they've got howitzers sitting on Kinmen Island, a few kilometers, which is supposed to be part of Taiwan, sitting off, pointed at Xiamen, only a few kilometers away. And there's got a 23K radius. Yeah, we've got the air identification zone, which the US put up in the 1950s over Taiwan.
And it covers most of the mainland.
3 provinces into the mainland. I mean, could you maybe go to Catalina Island off Los Angeles, to Catalina Island and say, okay, we're just going to stick an identification zone. That's going to take in the whole of Los Angeles as well as Catalina Island. Yeah. So we've got to put these things in context. China's being defensive out on their borders. Yes, and as you say, they're moving out in the South China Sea, but they're creating a buffer to protect themselves. Yeah.
Now, you wanted to keep this under 1 hour today, and so did I, and we're at 57 minutes. So let's move on from the politics and say that picture there is a really important picture for someone who's just ridden 4,931 kilometers, because that's the border of Kazakhstan.
Okay.
And that's what it took us to get there. The mountains that you can see in the distance, the snow-covered mountains, that is actually Kazakhstan. That building is the Customs and Immigration Hall. Go through there, out the other side, and you're standing in Kazakhstan. It's that close. So I've got tattooed on my arm, I've got something that says I did 4,000, I don't know if you can see that, 4,931 kilometers. And that's where we ended up. And that's the reason I show in that picture, because we're really right at the end of a 2-month, 61 days that took us to get from Macau to there. And 4,930 of it was on a bike. So we did a pretty decent job, I think.
Like a true Celtic Scythian.
Maybe. And just for the record, secretly here, the lady taking the photograph on the
Yes.
right-hand side with the grey jacket, that's the wife. That's my
On the
wife.
right jacket, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even realize until just now she's in the picture.
Oh,
So, yeah, you get to see the wife very briefly. So, moving on from there to,
yep.
I want to show this one. This is
Yes.
this is another interesting photograph. That's my mother-in-law there, standing next to a little Cantonese lady, retired teacher, primary school teacher, and she's standing next to something that looks very, very Tibetan.
Yeah.
And if you zoom in and take a look at that, which is what my next photograph does, what do you see in
Is that
China?
what characters below? There's characters above. And there's
The characters above are Tibetan. The characters below are Chinese. And this is one of the points that I wanted to make about it. We talk about the oppression of religion. First of all, religion is written into the Constitution. Freedom of religion is in the Constitution. You can choose to be whatever religion you want. Second point is all religions are actually encouraged to use, and ethnicities are encouraged to use their own languages, use everything. But everyone in school gets taught Chinese in the entire country. Now, here's the issue that causes the problem. If you want to be a preacher or a missionary, that's illegal. So going out to try and convert people to your religion is against the law in China. Schools cannot be secular. You cannot have a school that allows teaching of any religion. There is no religion taught in any school. And I think I said this last week, if you want to become a priest, you can. If you want to become an imam, a Muslim imam, you can. There are, I think it was 103 Islamic institutions where you can learn to become an imam and learn to become a leader of the Muslim community. I'm not exactly sure how many seminaries there are in China, and probably not many. I would think that most people who go to a seminary in China would go to either Hong Kong or Macau, where there are several. And they're still China, but then they probably come back into the mainland and they can become priests. You're not allowed to preach. You are allowed to pray. You're allowed to lead prayers. You're not allowed to preach conversion. And that is a throwback to more than 100 years ago when we had the Taiping Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, the Mohammedan Rebellion. These three things caused the deaths of literally millions, tens of millions of people. And China is very, very conscious that it doesn't take much for a religious group to become a religious cult. And Falun Gong is an extremely good example of that. You and I know about Falun Gong. And most of our listeners and viewers would probably understand that Falun Gong is banned. Some people would say, why ban something that just practices Tai Chi? Oh, no. That's not at all what Falun Gong is. That's not at all. What Falun Gong is quite an evil religion.
It's a racist. It's not a
religion.
It's a racist and homophobic religion. I
believe even the ABC in Australia are starting to understand that now and have made a couple of shows about it. It's starting to get out there that Falun Gong is a cult. Falun Gong is banned in China. If you practice Falun Gong, you will go to prison. You will get warnings first. But if you decide that you want to be a martyr to your cause, you're going to prison. And same thing as probably people who practice Christianity 600, 700, 2,000 years ago.
In Australia, if a cult came out in Australia that was saying that mixed race people are an abomination, should be killed, and black people of a dark skin should be, and LGBTI people are satanic, our anti-discrimination racist laws would come into effect on that, because in Australia we have laws against racist and hate speech. So so this is not just China. Unfortunately, Falun Gong go under the radar in Australia. But I tell you one thing, I heard some news that some shopping centres that used to carry the Epoch Times newspaper apparently got complaints that paper's from Falun Gong, which has racist views, and they have come out and said that they're pulling them off the front of their...
Well, Yvonne, anybody who wants to read an Epoch Times, I say Epoch, others say Epoch, but anybody who wants to read the Epoch Times and have a look at it with a critical point, from a critical point of view, the first thing you're going to see is racism against China.
Yes.
Chinese people, because it is extremely anti-China. Now, the reason they're anti-China is because they're banned here, simple as that. So those people who are looking at that are going to look at it and say, well, people read it and say, yeah, this is right, China is evil. The only reason people think China is evil is because you pick up any newspaper, switch on any news media, that's what you're going to read or see. Until Paul Keating came out 2-3 days ago and said what he said, I have not for the last 3 years heard a sensible word about China in Australian media. And Paul Keating came out and he touched on all of the points. And everything he said, except one point I would disagree with, but he touched on all of the points that I agree with. And I know, because I live here, I see it every day, what he's saying is right. Now, I don't get into the geopolitics of governance in China at all. I don't know much about how the party politics works. But what I do know is that the people of China don't want wars. They don't want a war with Australia. They don't want a war with Taiwan. Why would they want to go back to 1948 when they were shooting each other? They don't want that. That's not what this is about. What they're saying is Taiwan can be on its own. It can be independent. They just can't say we're not China. As soon as they say we're not China, then China says, oh, yes, you are, and you're coming back. So all they have to do is acknowledge that they can be independent. And even China says this. They can have their system. They can have their politics. They can have their island. But they can't say they're not China. That's all that is.
Just wrapping up on that, Jezza, not many people realise that Paul Keating actually got China into ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which was set up with the primary goal of having a peaceful way for different Asian countries to settle their differences and not go to war. So ASEAN was set up for that purpose. And Paul Keating was actually one who lobbied for China to be accepted into ASEAN. So,
I think the most important thing that Paul Keating said, apart from calling Boris Johnson coconut head, which I loved, and then the thing about the theme park sliding into the ocean, that's fantastic. He's very good at stuff like that. But Coconut Head was his best, I think. But the most important thing that he said in terms of geopolitics is that Australia is currently seeking security from Asia rather than seeking security in Asia. Australia wants to be Asian, but it's being very un-Asian about how it is being Asian. It wants to be in Asia because that's geographically where it's best suited. It's a long, long way from Africa and America. A long way from both of those. It's very close to Asia.
I'll tell you something, an old connection between Australia and China. My wife originally, as you know, is from East Timor. Her father's Chinese. In the 13th century, China was trading sandalwood for East Timor, which is just off Australia. And there's the sea slug, the medicinal sea slug.
They eat them a lot here,
Chinese were trading that from Australia with Malaysian seafarers and possibly coming here themselves before the Portuguese come out in the Ming Dynasty. So there's a lot of research on this.
So why didn't China colonize in the way the white people did?
No,
they could have. And I think he mentioned, and I didn't know this, I wasn't aware of this, but the empire or the king of Siam had, Thailand had people in Australia before the French had, the Dutch had, the Brits took it over. They took this land and this beautiful country and said, we're going to call this Britain or British, and then took it all over. But they were not by a very long, long way the first people to go there. And this is the thing with China. China has never colonized anybody, ever. They marched into Vietnam in 1979, but they marched out again 3 months later. When was the last time China invaded someone? I don't know.
Exactly.
It might be in history. And then people say, oh, they invaded Taiwan. They invaded Tibet. The invasion of Taiwan was by the KMT in 1949, if you want to put it that way.
And you know, what's interesting is that, you know, you're talking about the South China Sea and those trade routes. China had those trade routes in the 1400s, 15th century, and probably before, because I know in the 13th century, there's annals about China getting sandalwood from East Timor, which is only a few hundred kilometres off Australia. And they had those trade routes with the Macassan Malaysians as well to Australia to get trepang. So there was an ASEAN trade route way back then. So, you know, for AUKUS and, you know, the old East India Empire type attitude to come in and say, hey, we're going to cut your lunch now on your trade routes. No, they're out of touch. They're definitely out of touch.
I agree. And Paul Keating is pretty much right on everything, except he said they may be oppressing people in Xinjiang, but that shouldn't be the entire conversation. And I disagree that they're oppressing people in Xinjiang.
I spoke to Suzanne Grosvenor, who's his PA, and I sent her my blog on my research on Xinjiang, which I've taken a lot from yourself and people like Daniel Dumrill and other parts of research I've done. So I think he's just not up to speed on these issues, is what people like yourself and myself.
Yeah, it's sad to see people like him and Kevin Rudd, who are well informed about China, not being up to speed about what's going on in Western China. That's the problem. I think on that happy note, mate, we better call it a day. It's an hour and 10 minutes, and we promised to be less than an hour.
No, that's all right.
We're going to cut about 20 or 30 seconds off, I think, at the beginning, so it'll be less than this. All right. So let's call it a day, and we'll catch up again next week for the same sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Jezza. Good journey of discussion. And I hope people out there can learn something from what we're talking about and post comments down in the YouTube comment section.
Yeah, post comments, ask questions, please. Yeah.
Subscribe and hit the bell below, and we'd like to hear your feedback.
I'm going to have to go because, as my wife just reminded me, I have a class in 10 minutes.
Oh, you better go teach.
I'm studying. Okay, talk to you later. No, I'm studying. I'll talk to you later on.
Oh, you're studying, sorry, class studying.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good luck with that. Thank you, Jezza.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.